UFO Channel.
On November 12, 1988, Mark's friend inadvertently gained access to a highly classified airshow where the featured hardware of the event was real flying saucers. They were really strange looking, but appeared functional and were named to suggest anti-gravity and reverse-engineered alien technology. An official present stated they could travel faster than light. Despite their futuristic performance capabilities, these appeared to be stripped-down, road-worn working prototypes, which had seen practical operation for years. If this were the case, they were crude but tangible proof of concept for a staggering leap in aviation technology. They used extremely advanced electromagnetic or field propulsion, as opposed to solid or jet fuel, nuclear power, or any other commonly known conventional means. It also meant our government and at least one other major defense contractor, Lockheed Martin, had been developing and deploying functional systems along these lines for many years.
And he just sat down, and right where we were sitting there at his table, he just kind of sketched out with an ink pen on a piece of legal-size white paper, and put some little handwritten call-outs around the edges that described, the number of capacitor plates in each one of the little sections, that there were, they were so wide at the end, and the crew compartment was definitely about 12 feet in diameter. Just kind of put all these things down as close as he could remember to the way they existed.
This was called the flux liner.
This is probably the strangest one you've shown me yet. This actually flies?
It actually flies on the principles of high voltage electrical charges.
Alicia Davison described being escorted into the engine room and seeing the propulsion system components. And it involved a central column that was made of a transparent glass-like material. She said there was a silvery fluid that was spiraling upward at the bottom of this column. Down in kind of this well that was in the center of the spacecraft was this little tiny flywheel-like mechanism spinning, which matched the ARV also. And this is at a point when this young lady had never seen any of the drawings that I'd done of what the ARV was structured like. I was just talking about propulsion components in general. But then she said that when you looked across this little well, this lowered floor area in the center of the room was like a guardrail around it. She stood there. So you could look across, and she said it looked like below the deck she was standing on was this glass-like material with these coils of wire going through it. And they were spaced out in the same proportions as the ones on the ARV. The thing that she said that was most significant was that the column itself was rotating in one direction, and the flywheel was spinning in the opposite direction. There was counter-rotation, which is something that's often been reported in UFO sightings. You see components on the craft that are spinning in opposite directions.
Back here on Earth, the scientific community has been busy since the end of the Industrial Revolution. There have been dozens, perhaps hundreds of US and international patents dealing directly with electrokinetics and electrogravitics, going back to the turn of the last century. It would be safe to assume private industry and the military have also been working on a great deal of related applications off the public record. In short, since Nikola Tesla's first experiments with pushing electricity around, mankind has had a thing for anti-gravity.
I find it really remarkable that there's so much similarity between the two objects.
Mm-hmm. And when is that patent from?
May 30th, 1967. It's called a magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion apparatus.
And so I started thinking, well, maybe it's like a cyclotron. Maybe there's an electrical discharge from this. Basically, this whole thing looks like a giant Tesla coil. It's got the capacitor array. It's got, a central column that looks like the secondary windings of a Tesla coil. And this might even go back to something that Nikola Tesla discovered back in the 1940s, and it just was all hushed up, and all the UFO sightings we've ever seen were something that came from Nikola Tesla and not from another planet.
The ARV system, for all of its claims of flashy, out-of-this-world propulsion capabilities, was indeed remarkably simple. It could be described as a large-scale, souped-up Tesla coil, designed to negate gravity and inertia, with off-the-shelf navigation and life support systems bolted on, almost as an afterthought. You could think of it as the Model T of anti-gravity vehicles, an industrial dune buggy, or crude hot rod that can get you to Mars in a few minutes. In this version at least, first-class seating was still a way off.
There's a large capacitor array. Through the middle of the crew compartment is a central column that's called the amplifier section that's in the middle of the craft. On the very center point of that column is what looks like a large 9-foot diameter flywheel type mechanism. Then around the belt line of the crew compartment is about a 2-foot wide coil of wire that's embedded in the same glass-like material that the capacitor section plates are embedded in. The ejection seats are mounted back to back. There's 4 of them in the smallest version of the craft, and they're mounted on this central column on a set of rails. A bowl that moves around and can be used to convey the commands of the pilot in terms of what he wants to do in terms of shaping the field around the vehicle. And right in the center of that bowl is a kind of laser diode.
This aircraft was using extremely high voltages, and the voltages would ionize the air around the vehicle so much that it would start producing X-ray photons, which are absolutely lethal. So you have to have basically a barrier to protect yourself.
With a little air-driven claw that's on the end of it. In fact, I think that the craft's magnetic field or electromagnetic field is probably so powerful that conventional little electric motors probably wouldn't work. The electrostatic field created by this huge capacitor array and the ionization that occurs just because of the propulsion system might be enough to create a level of ionization around the craft that's high enough that it would produce X-ray photons of its own accord. And so you would want to be able to protect the pilot and the crew members from that radiation. So anyway, that's the general overview of the structure of the vehicle. This is a vehicle that has the ability to travel up to or beyond the speed of light. And part of the reason that it's able to do that is because it exploits the energy form that's embedded in space-time that's responsible for the effects of mass and inertia.
So here we have a configuration of various components, creating a system that's somehow capable of producing and maintaining an insane amount of energy in a concentrated field around the vehicle. This field can be precisely controlled by the pilot with the aid of a basic throttle, an alien steering ball, and a bunch of casino cameras. There's plenty of onboard oxygen, handy if you're off the planet, and a lead coating so the occupants don't get fried in their seats, and a robot arm, in case you need a robot arm somewhere. It looks like a big clumsy diving bell from 1905, but apparently works like a helicopter you can take past light speed. Its beauty and elegance lie in the propulsion system, maybe a really fast one that gets around currently accepted physics, one we commonly associate with UFOs.
For anybody who has followed the work of Einstein or just basic physics, one of the sort of inviolable rules of physics is that there's no material object that can actually go faster than the speed of light. So somehow or other, and I'm not saying we got this from aliens, but they did call it the alien reproduction vehicle, but somehow or other, this simple system that Brad described in these diagrams was able to do this.
In the middle of last century, physicists made an astounding discovery, and that is what we ordinarily consider empty space isn't empty at all. Even if you go to the far reaches of outer space, it turns out that rather than emptiness, what we call the vacuum is really a seething cauldron of what we call quantum energy, or zero-point energy. Zero point just simply means that even if you froze the entire universe down to absolute zero, froze out all motion, where everything would be as quiet as you could possibly get it, this energy is still there. It was predicted by the mathematics of quantum theory, but the numbers were so large. For example, there's enough energy in the volume of a coffee cup to evaporate the world's oceans. It was thought, well, this must be some kind of artifact in the theory. But as time went on, various predictions in quantum theory were verified in the laboratory, and it finally turned out we had to take these numbers seriously.
So in a sense, if you find the right way to do it, you can actually sort of reduce the mass of an object. And if you can do that, then of course it takes less propulsive force to push it around. It means that it can go a lot faster because it's not limited by the amount of mass that it increases to as it accelerates. In fact, it may in fact be a situation where the faster you go, the more energy you have available to continue the acceleration process, and at the same time the mass is becoming relatively less and less and less. So it really enables the possibility of being able to go faster than the speed of light without violating general relativity, and that was the most fascinating aspect of the whole thing.
By using the flux in the vacuum of space-time as a power source for your propulsion system. So literally, the faster you go, the more energy you have available that you convert into propulsive force, and the lower the relative mass of the vehicle becomes. So it's actually sort of an inversely proportional kind of a relationship.
Most scientists, with an instant response, would think on special relativity terms and say, well, the velocity of light is a limitation. You can't go faster than the speed of light. And therefore, to conceive of us exploring stars or other people coming here, it's too far. They just can't get from here to there. We might explore our own solar system, but that's probably as far as we're going to get. But the truth of the matter is that in general relativity, that's not the case. There are options there. That limitation now has begun to evaporate due to the new understandings and predictions coming out of general relativity. So that's not the issue.
There was obviously an electromagnetic field that was forming around this ring of wire that ran around the crew compartment, and that would form a kind of donut-shaped or toroid-shaped electromagnetic field with field lines stroking right through the middle of the craft, which happened to be where there was this large central column. Now, the central column was supposed to be the most secret part of the vehicle. Brad didn't seem to know too much about that, but he said that it used mercury in some form. He thought it might use it as a noble gas, vaporized mercury.
The mercury, based on a number of accounts, appears to circulate in a kind of a closed loop system that runs down through the cylinder in the middle and then back up in the space between the inner cylinder and the outer cylinder. And there's a counter-rotation kind of a mechanism that's occurring there too. And at the midpoint is this thing that looks like a flywheel. But in effect, what I think its actual function is similar to what is called a homopolar generator, where you can use the centrifugal forces of a disk, a conducting metal disk that's spinning, to actually throw the electrons in the material out to the edge, where they can be literally tapped off with something that looks like a brush that has conductive bristles. Now, I believe that what happens is that this vehicle develops probably several million volts of voltage, and the sheer power of the electrostatic field that is created in this capacitor array actually has the ability to polarize the surrounding space-time, and it polarizes the so-called zero-point energy that is embedded in the space-time. So it creates kind of a positive and a negative aspect to the status of that zero-point energy that's surrounding the vehicle.
So just to kind of give a little background, the idea of a space warp works on the principle of expanding and contracting space in such a way that allows you to go somewhere very, very quickly.
What this does is it leads to something that was described by Michele Alcubierre in his 1994 paper on warp drive, the creation of a warp drive that would not violate general relativity. And one of the things that he was suggesting was that you would be able to engineer a vector or a pair of vectors in space-time that would, on the one hand, cause a compression of space-time ahead of the vehicle and an expansion of space-time behind the vehicle, and that there would be an intervening space between those two phenomena that would pretty much peg your sense of gravity your sense of inertia to the environment that you departed from when you initiated this movement.
So in essence what you have is you have a spherical event horizon around this particular region that might be called a dynamically engineered local space-time. And this particular region is set up in such a way that it creates these influences in the surrounding metric in such a way that it also creates a vector that goes in this direction. And so it's kind of like it's almost like having a black hole ahead of you and an expansion of space-time behind you. But the actual environmental conditions that you experience inside the spacecraft are pretty much pegged to the time and place that you start out from.
So you don't have any sense of G-forces or being moved around. You don't have any sense of acceleration, because the entire pocket of space-time that you're encapsulated in is being accelerated by the vectors that are created around the system. So it's uniformly accelerated. The space-time pocket that you've created, the vehicle itself, the crew, the cargo, everything is moved as one complete package, and so there's no sense of acceleration. But what it allows for, according to Alcubierre's calculations, is what he was calling an arbitrarily large speed, which suggests something in excess of the speed of light at superluminal speeds. So to the person that's inside the vehicle, it may appear that you begin to accelerate away from a particular location, but to the person who's standing outside the disturbed region of space-time, it looks as though you just were gone, just in an instant.
So this is an ARV, isn't that what it's called?
That's what some people call it. We call it RAM, Replication Alien Machine.
Oh, I see.
Once we retrieved, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, several of these extraterrestrial vehicles and began to study them, we combined that knowledge with knowledge we already had. Because remember, we had some people like T. Townsend Brown who were studying anti-gravity quite independent of this issue back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. But when their information got combined with studying these spacecraft, they figured out, this is how they're working.
So they were modeling the universe as being sort of this empty, material-free environment that had this energy that was embedded in it, almost like a fluid in a way, that it had all of this potential that you couldn't see until you found a way of driving it out of this homogeneous sort of state of equilibrium and getting to do usable work.
Now, what is zero-point energy? I'm going to show you many different definitions, but let me quote Nikola Tesla. In 1891, the world's greatest electrical futurist, Nikola Tesla, stated, quote, "Throughout space there is energy. Is this energy static or kinetic? If static, our hopes are in vain. If kinetic, and we know for certain it is, then it is a mere question of time when men will succeed in attaching their machinery to the very wheelwork of nature. Many generations may pass, but in time our machinery will be driven by a power obtainable at any point in the universe."
And this is very important. It means that we, Homo sapiens, have the ability to access this so-called zero-point field of energy, which is the ambient field of energy from which all matter and energy is fluxing, and can access that energy and generate all the power we need to run this planet without fossil fuels or pollution.
The white background represents the dark energy field. The pulsing represents the electromagnetic distortion around all matter, like two atoms. The electromagnetic distortion pushes dark energy away from matter on a gradient and makes all matter appear to have an attraction towards itself. Gravity can be defined as the electromagnetic force that matter exerts on the universe on dark energy that causes a dark energy field effect, or gravity. You can scale this up from atoms all the way to planets and suns and even black holes. Anything that creates gravity is actually not pulling things into itself like a gravity well. More, it is pushing dark energy away, and in doing so, dark energy is pushing harder on the side with the least distortion. As the fields touch each other, it creates a path of least resistance, and the two objects are forced together by the stronger dark energy field on the side with less distortion, giving matter an attraction towards itself. It's dark energy that causes an attraction of matter towards itself. that creates gravity.
I mean, you could make impenetrable fields. You can have propulsion that is mind-boggling as the crafts operate.
It would be the ultimate weapon.
Well, not just the ultimate weapon, but it would really be the ultimate thing. It would catapult mankind forward. And what really sucks is the military is in control of this.
I should, I neglected to mention this during my presentation, but Bob and I have talked about it before. A guy named Ben Rich, who Jim Goodall knows and interviewed several times. Ben Rich was the head of the Skunk Works, which they operated things at Groom Lake, and had been there. They developed the U-2 and SR-71 and Stealth. If anybody would know about advanced technology, it's him and Kelly Johnson. So a lot of people have speculated whether Ben Rich and those guys had incorporated alien technology into some of the advanced airframes that we've got. And I even had a chance to ask him on the day that the Stealth was unveiled out there at Nellis whether any alien stuff was in there. He said no. But other people have talked to him. Jan Harzan, who's here from MUFON, heard a speech that Ben Rich gave at UCLA in which he basically said, we now have the technology to take ET home. We had the calculations slightly wrong, but we can do anything you can imagine. We can travel to the stars. But, he said, the technology is locked up in black budgets and black programs and will never see the light of day. What do you think about that?
Well,
it's sort of like the same thing you're saying.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like what I'm saying. You know, I hope that's not the case, but I mean, how do you pry it out of there? It really, there should be a lot more people working on this. We just had a report to what was going on, so it's not like you can ever say, you know, we really don't know. We've been working on this 2 weeks. You better come up with something. So it's, you know, look, we think it's an accelerator, and you know, we've identified that that's, you know, 114, 115, 160. It looks like it's 115. It's an element, and you have to explain this stuff to guys that absolutely have minimal scientific background, and just try that when you're dealing with stuff that's not even, you know, from the Earth.
So how does it work? I mean, how does it work? What you learn, you get a piece of it, a triangle. It's in, and how does it function?
Really, you just put the. I wish I had that model that.
It's in my car.
Show me. Is it really? Okay. You just put the fuel in there. There's a little cap that sits on top. And then as soon as you put, yet nothing happens, but as soon as you put the lid on, it turns on. There's no on switch. Yeah, it's just, it's like it attains resonance or something. It just is on. Which makes you wonder, how does it work in the craft? Because no one's taken the lid off, because in the craft, it sits on the ground and there's a conduit that sits over it and goes to the top of the craft. So, but it's not clear how anything works in the craft.
And it generates gravity.
Oh yeah, yeah. It generates its own artificial gravitational field, and that lifts the craft off the ground.
We've had conversations in private about how this accounts for some UFO cases. I mean, it in effect achieves invisibility in a sense. You could be saying right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. Because light, it will bend it around there, and sorry, I didn't leave that. I left out that pretty important observation. When the craft was up, I mean, you could walk underneath and look straight up, and you can't see the craft until you step to the side, and it becomes visible again. It's quite amazing, you know. So it bends light, just like you know, you could see on a hot roadway in the summertime how heat would affect that coming off of you know. But here you're in a much more controlled situation, and the shape of the gravitational field, the artificial field around the craft, if you look at that and then we're able to stand at different vantage points, you can just look around it. Now, this isn't something new. We know this from, you know, looking at faraway stars. They call it gravitational lensing, where a star might be over here, but because we're looking around another star, it bends light, and, you know, but here again, here is an artificial source, a machine that does this, and that's everything. But yeah, like I said, all the science fiction things become reality. There's your invisibility cloak, there's your, impenetrable force field, here's your field propulsion system, and, here's you're even beginning to tamper with, potential time travel.
Let's switch it on, let's see what it does.
Through this coil of thick wire, we're about to pass a huge alternating electric current. On top is a 1 kilogram aluminium plate.
So we hear this noise. What's that noise?
It's the vibration of the plate, because it's vibrating at 2 times the frequency of this one.
Whoa! Whoa! How does it do that?
To find out, I've come to the place where it all started, the Royal Institution in London.
This is the key to Faraday's magnetic lab. It's amazing that lock still works.
From the 1870s onwards, it became a storeroom, which is why it survived, and it survived intact. All the joinery, giant electromagnet, exactly the same as Faraday.
So this is exactly as Faraday would have had.
That's right, yep.
In Faraday's time, it was known that electric current creates a magnetic field, but it remained an open question whether the reverse is possible, if a magnetic field could generate electric current. Faraday answered this question with his most famous apparatus.
Faraday's electromagnetic induction ring, which is this.
In August 1831, Faraday wrapped 2 coils of insulated wire around this iron ring.
But in 1831, you could not go down to your local electrical hardware shop and ask for X number of meters of insulated wire. You had to insulate the wire as you went, and so as you pushed and pulled the wire out of the ring, you had to insulate it. It takes 10 working days, which is a huge investment of time.
But the investment paid off. When Faraday connected a battery to one of the coils, he saw a brief pulse of current in the other coil. And when he disconnected the battery, he saw a pulse of current in the other direction. He realized that current was induced in the second coil only when the magnetic field through it was changing. And if they hadn't been wrapped on the same ring, Faraday may have noticed that the 2 coils repel each other when the current is induced, and that's due to the interaction of their magnetic fields. Which brings us back to this. Through the bottom coil, we are passing a huge electric current, 800 amps, which alternates in direction 900 times per second. This ensures there will always be a changing magnetic field above the coil. Instead of a second coil, we're using the aluminium plate, but the principle is the same. The changing magnetic field induces currents in the plate that create an opposing magnetic field, so it levitates.
How awesome is that?
This current is not only good for levitating the plate, it can also make light bulbs glow.
A gift.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that is cool.
Not too close because it will burn the arms.
Can I put it there?
Yeah.
And just as current in a toaster element heats it up, the induced current in the plate dissipates its energy as heat.
Some water too.
Thank you.
Yeah, to see the temperature.
Check out how hot this plate is. Oh, that is nuts. Is this your favorite demo?
It's like a flying barbecue or something.
Tell me this is not the best dinner table centerpiece. It levitates, it gives you light, and you can cook on it. And all the while, you're demonstrating Faraday's law of electromagnetic induction.
Time travel.
It occurs to you, hey, this could work not only in space but underwater. Maybe that's why the Navy's interested to run the program. I mean, it's odd, isn't it, that it's the U.S. Navy running the program out there?
That never occurred to me. No, I swear to this, I never even thought about that thing operating underwater.
It would work just fine, though, wouldn't it?
I guess. I don't know. I don't understand why it wouldn't, but it'd be interesting to see what the water does.
You had said, I remember, I could barely get my pointy little head around it when we were first talking about this, but that if somebody had one of these and were out in space and wanted to come to Earth, in essence, they're not propelling themselves toward Earth. It works differently.
We're getting ready to replicate an experiment that you demonstrated quite some time ago.
1997 for the time period, yes.
And over here I got a 200 watt amplifier, guitar amp, as a matter of fact. And we got a barium titanate cylinder with various little objects laying on the tray, piece of foam here, metal tray. And this is basically a demonstration of a type of levitation, if I am correct.
correct, yes.
And is there anything you can tell us about this?
Oh, I find it quite interesting. I used a grounded bridge type crown amplifier. It was 2,500 watts, 0 to 110 volts. And I noticed some very unusual effects with the barium cylinder, and that put out a force field kind of feeling to the cylinder itself. It affected objects around it and would project the noise effects up to several hundred feet away.
Okay, so we're using a much lower power level now, because obviously this thing is not a 2,000 watt amp.
Right.
It's a 200 watt amp. But nonetheless, it is still causing some translational movement within these objects on here. So
exactly, and when I tried to hold it, I could not hold it.
Right? Yeah. In fact, the two modes that the craft operated on are they label Delta and Omicron configuration. Delta meaning using all three amplifiers, and Omicron obviously meaning just one. And the way the craft would work is, get rid of my reactor here. Now I'm going to draw a really bad flying saucer here. So normally you would have the three amplifiers hanging, or the three emitters hanging down in Omicron mode. A single one would swing sideways, and you would have the other two sitting like that. Now, what happens is the two that are facing straight down essentially act like a pedestal where they just keep the craft steady. The one swung out to the side creates a gravitational distortion off the edge. And these in Omicron configuration, these things really fly unstable. They do not look like any sort of high-tech technology. To give you an example, if you put a bowling ball in the middle of your bed and 2 feet away you take your fist and you push it down, the bowling ball rolls towards it. And that's exactly how the craft operates. It focuses the single emitter and creates a gravity distortion, essentially a divot in space-time, and the craft rolls forward, in the distortion. So that's basically how the thing moves around. So, and this is opposed to our conventional propulsion, whether you're using a jet, a rocket, a propeller. We always take something and accelerate it out the back using the action-reaction principle and push forward. And these guys are doing it exactly opposite. They're creating a distortion in front and sucking towards it.
Second. But as I was saying, while this thing is running and I try to grab the cylinder feels very slippery, like if I tried to pick it up it would just slip right out of my hands. So here we go, let's begin the demonstration.
Yeah.
Not quite as impressive as the original demonstration, but nonetheless, it does work.
Yep, we're getting there.
Now, you're using a microphone here.
That's right.
And you're basically generating a feedback type situation so that you're creating a self-resonance within the cylinder. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, yes.
Okay, so basically that's sort of a simple way of achieving maximum power out of the cylinder by causing it to self-resonate.
Basically, yes. And as your amplifiers get more powerful, the more effects you'll have with something like this.
Yes.
And it's interesting the effect of trying to hold on to it where it's very slippery, but...
Yeah, it feels very strange when you try to pick it up. You don't really feel any vibration. It just feels slippery, like it's got, you know, grease on it or something, you know.
Yep, kind of forces your hand off of it.
Yeah, I felt it push my hand at least once.
Okay, Don. Well, I think it did fantastic. Great idea bringing in your amplifier.
All right, well, thanks for the demonstration, John.
Thank you for working it.
Tesla Colt signing out.
There it goes.
If you would like to continue to grow your mind, please push the subscribe button.